There we go. How much is that? Might just be enough for an engine. Uh-oh, someone's angry.
Looks like you got Hector Mayo. Good. We have a small ring of car thieves in the area.
Hey everyone, how's it going? For some time now, I've had this idea in my head swimming for a while now that started early this year, and recently I'd finally decided to pull the trigger and decided to, bring out whatever consoles I had from back in the day out into the living room and start playing them again. And there are loads of videos out there where people, young and old, have been bringing physical media back into their lives, whether it be through books, music, movies, or games. There's just something about the physical touch with, a product or a form of media that just, feels complete. And that's the feeling that I was wanting to get back at the time of this idea. And it's something that I'm still exploring as we speak. There's just that sometimes indescribable feeling of an object that makes it feel like that it's really yours. Or at least that's how it should be. For example, I recently bought a secondhand copy of Need for Speed Carbon Own the City for the Game Boy Advance. I can pick this up, rotate it around like it's a 3D model from Blender, slide it into a Game Boy Advance SP or a DS Lite, and off I go. Wait, hold on. Let me just blow on it real quick, just to make sure it works. Okay, there we go. Now, here I have something I bought and paid for and can feel like that it's mine. And yeah, you probably know where this is going, right? Given the state of gaming and digital media. Well, I'm not going to go there and go into a full debate about it and tell you what's right and what's wrong. Instead, I'm just going to talk from my own perspective and try and convey my recent feelings and experiences with the subject in mind and just get straight to the point on things. Everyone in gaming has a journey, a starting point with what console had the most impact for them. For me personally, it was the PS2. And while we had earlier consoles than that, the PS2 for me was it. I mean, it was the one, And every person has that one console. And mine was the PS2. So naturally, I started off with getting it set up in the living room, and no, I don't have a CRT TV anymore. I just work with what I've got, and that's that. Anyways, I bought some PS2 titles that I didn't have before and piled up ones I already had but wanted to play, hooked up the cables, and to my surprise, the console turned on like it was yesterday. At this point, it had probably been a decade or more since I last turned this thing on, and I had no assurance whatsoever whether it would even work or not. And a big fear that can manifest is the realization that the console might not even turn on after all these years, which is one of the downsides of physical gaming in the retro scene and just gaming in general, where products eventually break down and stop working. For example, the PS2 console worked, but the controllers that I had for it weren't working at all. I shook it and it was rattling, which meant that either something was wrong with it or the controller was just cooked, since it had been so long since it's been touched and whatever parts were inside have just fallen off. So instead of trying to get it fixed or replace it with a more expensive PS2 controller, I compromised on a cheap third-party controller to get me started. And yes, I know that's a gamble in itself, especially if we're talking about PS2 controllers. But so far, it works fine. The triggers do feel a bit stiff, but you get used to them after a while. Everything else seems to work okay, so for now, I'm happy. The games that I tested were the first Midnight Club and Need for Speed Undercover. The back of the disc is always going to be a concern when you look at them, things like fingerprints, scratches, or even worse, cuts that are another thing to look out for when you're dealing with retro physical media, and that's again a huge downside to physical copies in general, where wear and tear and just gradual decay becomes a unfortunate conversation that you'll have to deal with the product and yourself. Whereas with digital, there are different problems, but there are also solutions to problems that you would find on a physical platform. So it's like a vice versa situation there. But nowadays you do have workarounds for those sort of things. And even back in those days, when the consoles were in their prime, people were finding workarounds for things like that. Jailbreaking, modding, hacking the console to read burnt discs, and, other things to basically enhance the experience and also circumvent dying copies of physical games. But due to the internet as it is today, you have other solutions in the digital space, and people sell accessories for old consoles to, again, enhance the experience even more, as well as, finding files for games that they can then store into a hard drive and then play on the console if they wish. People have also been creating emulation devices, both for couch TV sessions and, for handheld usage when they're on the go, which has acted as a sort of mediary between the physical and digital space. For example, I have the Miyu Mini Plus that I got from AliExpress for about $100 or so, and it's pretty damn good for what I paid for. I can run anything from NES all the way up to PS1 on it, and even Pico 8 if you're into fantasy consoles. That handheld that I mentioned is just one of many out there, and some even try to go for similar designs to console handhelds like the Game Boy Advance and the PSP, but with more juice injected into them. Now, back in the day, if you brought up this type of idea to someone, they would have just pointed and laughed at you, but nowadays it's actually a dream come true, and it's amazing that I can fit a device into my pocket, a device that can run PS2 games, Dreamcast games, and maybe even a PS3 game. Like, that's just insane. Like, I would never have thought that'd be possible back in the 2000s, but now it's a thing. It's possible, and that's one of the reasons why I think that there's no better time than now to get into retro gaming, because of how many ways you can approach it. And it's not just very old consoles, but even, stuff a little bit later, like say the 7th gen. Like when I boot up the 360 or the PS3, it's again been a wonderful return, just like it was for the PS2, and other consoles made around that time. For me personally, the 6th and 7th gen were the sweet spots for console gaming, and playing those consoles in particular has made me realize just how much I missed having a physical experience with a game. To feel a cartridge or a disc, it really takes me back. And while I love emulation, there are some feelings that can't be matched when compared to, the real thing. Like, it's like, say if someone was playing a simulator and thinking that they knew it all after thousands of hours dedicating to it, but not knowing all the physical simulations behind the weight of something attached to that simulation. Like say, the feeling of a steering wheel or the power of a power washer. There's like certain tangibles that you can't really ascertain in a simulation compared to doing it in real life. And the thing is, like, some people prefer the real thing and basically divorce themselves from the digital space entirely and are willing to pay for it so that they can maintain that physical experience with, say their games and whatnot. Having the cartridge and having the disc, is preferable to just having data on a computer. And for those that prefer to emulate, well, you do have some ways to create a nostalgic experience that's close enough, as long as you're okay with it not being 100%. Shaders are a good place to start. Even though I don't have a CRT TV anymore, I can use CRT-like shaders, including some color correction and gamma adjustments to create a more authentic look or something close enough. And in pixel art games, CRT shaders can give off a different look that sometimes looks a hell of a lot better, because after all, those games were made with those sort of TVs in mind in the first place. And it also made me realize just how much we've gotten used to seeing clean and raw pixels on a screen, where the pixels stand out more but not always for the better. And while it doesn't reach the same level as a well-made CRT setup, it's enough to get you close to the experience if you can find a close to accurate shader. With digital and physical, I found personally that the best balance is to have both in your life. I don't need it to be a one or the other situation. Access to digital media and physical media means that one way or another, I have a means to play what I want, and both sides have trade-offs to them. I know that one day my PS2 won't wake up, and I have other options to circumvent that. Get a new console or buy a clone equivalent, or use emulation. With digital, I can emulate on the computer or on retro handhelds or on the phone, but with physical media today, most of the time you would consider getting the physical copy instead if you knew that at some point you would trade the copy in, which is a plus for owning physical media. But if you don't like it, just sell it. Whereas with digital copies of, say, AAA or indie games, you have both the workarounds needed to try and sell it if you can, that's if you can at all, as well as the realization that one day the service attached to the game could shut down, which means that that game and every other game attached to that account will be gone. Which is why it's important to have both methods in your life, you know, digital and physical. Digital has its downsides, but it's way more convenient, and there's ways to enhance and upscale the experience of before. That way you get something that's smoother and in some ways looks even better if that's what you want. And, you know, in the digital space of gaming, I never have to worry about the condition of a cartridge or a physical disc. You know, I don't have to worry about scratches, fingerprints, or cuts, rattling parts, or dying components on an old console that isn't manufactured anymore. Things like that I don't miss whatsoever, but I do miss the physical sensations of opening up the PS2 eject button and seeing the disc slot reveal itself. Little things like that, even the best emulators can't replicate that experience. And when I was a kid, I was just happy playing what I had. I didn't think about the good and bad sides of digital or physical media, I just wanted to play. And that's in part to why I enjoy having both options rather than just the one, because what ultimately matters is that I have access to the experience that I want to enjoy and have fun with. Physical and digital is just a means to enjoy that experience. You know, it doesn't have to be, I prefer this or I prefer that. It's just, give me a way to play it and I'll have fun. And that's that. Returning to physical console gaming has been a blast so far, and comparing to how they actually played in comparison to the emulated experience is night and day. Even without all the upscaling and shading that people like to do, as well as the FPS patches to make it run smoother. And this topic in mind has mostly been focused on older games and not so much on newer games, because a lot of newer stuff, especially indie stuff, has been digitized for a long time now. However, some people do try and produce physical cartridges for new indie games. Like, for example, in the NES homebrew community, you can buy physical NES cartridges of brand new NES games. Old consoles, but new ideas materialized into cartridges from the past. And if you want to go outside the circle of gaming, people do the same thing for music. You know, lots of up and coming indie artists or artists from, you know, other communities or sites like Bandcamp have physical media options for, you know, for customers to buy, like, say, whether it be cassette tapes or even vinyl records. That's if you're into collecting physical media in music. Again, there are avenues for physical, you know, consumption that I'm glad still exists today, especially in a very digitized world where we're so used to just having everything on the side of a screen rather than, you know, an object that we can pick up. But that's a whole nother can of worms if you're like looking to explore further on the other subjects of, say, physical media and music or other forms of media. But in the realm of, say, retro gaming, I wholeheartedly believe that there really is no better time than now to get into retro gaming. And the thing is, you don't have to pick your poison here. You can do both. You can drink both and you'll be happier for it. Trust me. Thanks for watching.